The Johnson family had been driving through the Nevada desert for 3 hours when the impossible happened. Sarah Johnson was reading a travel magazine in the passenger seat, while her husband Mark focused on the endless ribbon of asphalt ahead. Their 2 children, Emma and Jake, were absorbed in their tablets in the back seat, and their golden retriever Buddy was sleeping peacefully between them. The first sign of trouble came as a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the car's metal frame. Mark initially thought it was engine trouble, but the sound grew louder and seemed to come from above. Sarah looked up from her magazine, a frown creasing her forehead as she noticed the strange blue light filtering through the windshield. "Dad, what's that?" Emma asked, pointing skyward through the sunroof. Mark pulled over and stepped out of the car, shielding his eyes against the harsh desert sun. What he saw defied every rational thought in his mind. A massive craft hovered silently above them, its surface a shifting mass of what looked like liquid metal. The craft was easily the size of a football stadium, casting an enormous shadow over the desert floor. Before Mark could react, beams of soft blue light descended from the craft, enveloping the entire family and their vehicle. He felt a strange tingling sensation as his feet left the ground. Sarah screamed as she watched her husband float upward, but her voice seemed muffled and distant. The children clung to each other while Buddy barked frantically, his fur standing on end. Within moments, the Johnson family found themselves standing in what appeared to be a vast metallic chamber aboard the alien vessel. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air hummed with an energy that made their skin crawl. Creatures unlike anything from Earth's evolutionary tree surrounded them. The aliens stood roughly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin appeared translucent, revealing a network of glowing veins beneath. Most disturbing were their faces, which seemed to shift and change like liquid mercury, never quite settling on a single form. When they spoke, their voices emerged as harmonic frequencies that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the humans' minds. Specimens acquired. One of the creatures communicated telepathically. "The feeding ritual may commence." Sarah pulled her children close while Mark stepped protectively in front of his family. Buddy growled low in his throat, sensing the danger even if he couldn't understand it. The aliens paid no attention to the family's obvious terror, treating them like livestock being prepared for slaughter. The chamber around them began to change, walls sliding away to reveal an even larger space. In the center stood something that defied description. It was massive, easily 3 stories tall, and seemed to be part machine, part living tissue. Tentacles as thick as tree trunks writhed from its base, while bioluminescent sacs pulsed with a sickly green light along its sides. The creature's mouth, if it could be called that, was a gaping maw filled with rows of crystalline teeth that sparkled like diamonds in the alien light. "The Ancient One requires sustenance," another alien communicated. "Your species has been selected for consumption. Consider it an honor." Mark found his voice despite his terror. "You can't do this. We're sentient beings with families, with lives." The alien seemed amused by his outburst. "Your protests are irrelevant. Many species have made similar claims before feeding. The Ancient One does not discriminate based on intelligence or emotional capacity." As the aliens began to herd the family toward the monstrous creature, something unexpected happened. Emma, only 12 years old, broke free from her mother's grasp and ran directly toward the Ancient One. The aliens were so surprised by this suicidal act that they momentarily froze, giving the girl precious seconds. "Emma, no," Sarah screamed, but her daughter was already within reach of the creature's tentacles. Instead of being consumed, Emma did something that would change everything. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small device that had been a gift from her grandfather, a veteran of multiple wars. It was an emergency flare, military grade, designed to burn at over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Emma activated the flare and thrust it directly into one of the creature's bioluminescent sacs. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Ancient One released a sound that was part scream, part mechanical alarm, and part something entirely inhuman. The creature thrashed wildly, its tentacles whipping through the air as the chemical fire spread across its organic components. The aliens, who had been so confident moments before, suddenly erupted into panic. Their telepathic communications became a chaotic storm of fear and confusion. The ship itself began to shudder as the Ancient One's death throes triggered automatic systems throughout the vessel. Mark realized this might be their only chance. He grabbed a piece of debris from the creature's thrashing and used it to break open what appeared to be a control panel. Sparks flew as alien technology failed catastrophically, and emergency lighting bathed the chamber in pulsing red light. "This way," he shouted to his family, spotting what looked like an escape route as blast doors began to open automatically throughout the ship. The Johnsons ran through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, with Buddy leading the way with an almost supernatural sense of direction. Behind them, they could hear the alien ship tearing itself apart as its systems failed in cascade fashion. The death of the Ancient One had triggered something the aliens had never anticipated. As they reached what appeared to be an escape pod bay, Sarah grabbed Mark's arm. "How did Emma know to do that?" Mark looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. "She didn't, she just acted on instinct." Pure human instinct. The escape pods were clearly designed for the aliens' physiology, but desperation drove the family to cram themselves into one of the vessels. As Mark struggled with the alien controls, Jake suddenly pointed to a series of symbols that seemed familiar. "Dad, those look like the star charts from the planetarium." Using his son's observation, Mark managed to activate the pod's navigation system. The pod ejected from the dying alien ship just as the Ancient One's final death convulsion sent shockwaves throughout the vessel. As they plummeted toward Earth's surface, the Johnson family watched through the pod's viewport as the massive alien ship began to break apart in the upper atmosphere. Pieces of the vessel streaked across the sky like a meteor shower, but something else was happening that none of them could have predicted. Other ships were approaching. Dozens of them, all of different designs, all converging on their location. The universe, it seemed, had been watching. The escape pod crashed into the Nevada desert with bone-jarring force, sending sand and debris flying in all directions. The Johnson family emerged battered but alive, with Buddy shaking sand from his golden fur and barking at the smoking wreckage around them. The alien technology had somehow cushioned their impact, though Mark suspected they had been incredibly lucky to survive at all. As they stood in the desert twilight, watching the burning remnants of the alien mothership streak across the sky, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The approaching ships they had seen from space were now visible even with the naked eye, growing larger by the minute. "Are those more of them?" Emma asked, unconsciously reaching for another flare from her backpack. Mark shielded his eyes and studied the approaching vessels. Unlike the organic flowing design of the ship they had escaped from, these craft were clearly built by different species. Some appeared crystalline, others metallic, and a few seemed to be constructed from materials that shifted between states of matter. The first ship to land was roughly pyramid-shaped, made from what looked like living crystal that pulsed with internal light. A hatch opened with a sound like wind chimes, and outstepped beings that resembled tall, graceful humanoids, made entirely of the same crystalline material. Their faces were geometric, with eyes that sparkled like diamonds. Behind them came ships of different designs, disgorging creatures that represented dozens of alien species. There were beings that looked like walking trees with silver bark, others that resembled oversized insects with iridescent carapaces, and some that appeared to be made of pure energy contained within mechanical suits. The Johnson family instinctively huddled together, prepared for another abduction or worse. But instead of threatening them, the aliens approached with what could only be described as reverence. The crystalline beings spoke first, their voices like the sound of singing crystal glasses. "We greet the humans who have accomplished the impossible," the lead crystal being said, its words somehow translating perfectly in their minds. "We are the Zeltharian Collective, and we have traveled far to witness this moment." A tree-like creature stepped forward, its bark shimmering in the desert heat. "I am Speaker Branchen of the Verdani Empire. We have monitored the harvester ship for cycles beyond counting. What you have done was thought impossible by every species in the galaxy." Mark found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "We don't understand." "What are you talking about?" The crystalline being's form brightened with what might have been excitement. "The creature you destroyed, what your species would call the Ancient One, was a devourer. They are parasitic entities that exist outside normal space-time, feeding on the life force of sentient beings. The species that captured you, the Cathani, have been their servants for over 10,000 years. An insectoid creature clicked forward, its antennae twitching with agitation. "The devourers have consumed entire civilizations. Hundreds of species have been fed to them across the galaxy. They are considered utterly indestructible, existing partially outside our dimensional reality. Sarah stepped forward, still clutching Jake's hand, but Emma just used a flare. How could something so simple destroy such a powerful creature? The tree being, Branchin, rustled what might have been leaves in the alien equivalent of laughter. That is precisely what makes your species so remarkable. You act without understanding the impossibility of your actions. The Devourer existed partially in hyperspace, making it immune to conventional weapons. But your young one attacked it with something far more dangerous than any energy weapon. Chemical fire, the crystalline being explained. A reaction that exists purely in base reality, anchored to your dimensional space. The Devourer could not phase shift away from something so fundamentally real. It was trapped in your dimension and vulnerable for the first time in eons. Emma looked up at the towering aliens with a mixture of pride and confusion. I just thought it looked like it might burn. The gathered aliens exchanged what could only be described as amazed glances. An energy being contained within a spherical mechanical suit floated closer, its voice emerging as electronic pulses. The child saw through 10,000 years of terror with simple intuition. This is why we came. This is why the galaxy watches. Mark was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. You're saying that thing has been destroying entire civilizations and we're the first to kill one? Not just kill, Branchin corrected. Obliterate. When a Devourer dies in base reality, it creates a resonance cascade that affects all Devourers across the galaxy. You have wounded something that spans dimensions. The crystalline being approached Emma directly, kneeling down to her eye level. Young human, you have done what billions of advanced beings could not. You have shown the galaxy that the Devourers can be defeated. But even as the aliens celebrated, new ships began appearing in the sky. These vessels were different from the others, darker, more ominous. They moved with predatory grace and their very presence seemed to dim the light around them. The Cathani fleet approaches, the insectoid being clicked in alarm. They will seek revenge for their sacred ancient one. Branchin's bark darkened with concern. The servant species believe the Devourers are gods. They will not allow this heresy to stand. The crystalline being stood, its form brightening with determination. Then we shall show them the truth. The age of the Devourers ends here. As the dark ships descended toward the desert, each alien species began preparing for battle. Weapons emerged from their vessels, energy fields activated, and the very air began to crackle with impending conflict. But Mark noticed something that filled him with both pride and terror. Every alien species present was looking to his family for guidance. These advanced civilizations with technology beyond human comprehension were waiting to see what the humans would do next. Jake tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, I think they want us to lead them. Sarah looked at her husband with wide eyes. Mark, we're just a family from Ohio. We don't know anything about intergalactic warfare. But Emma stepped forward, her young face set with determination that seemed far beyond her years. We know something they don't, she said simply. We know how to fight things that think they can't be beaten. The approaching Cathani ships began broadcasting a message that filled the minds of every being present. The harmonic frequencies carried rage, grief, and a promise of terrible retribution. The servant species had worshipped the Devourers for millennia, and the death of their god demanded blood. As the enemy fleet drew closer, the assembled alien forces looked to the Johnson family. Dozens of species that had never united before, brought together by the impossible actions of 4 humans and their dog. Mark realized that their ordeal was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The death of one monster had apparently awakened something much larger and more dangerous. But looking at his family, at his daughter who had acted with such incredible bravery, and at the alien allies who now surrounded them, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. The galaxy was about to change forever, and somehow, impossibly, a family from Ohio was going to be at the center of it all. The Cathani war fleet descended like a swarm of metallic locusts, their ships blocking out the stars with their sheer number. Each vessel pulsed with the same organic design as the mothership the Johnsons had escaped from, their hulls shifting and flowing like living tissue. The telepathic screams of rage and grief from the approaching fleet were so intense that several of the assembled aliens staggered. Under the psychic assault, Mark Johnson stood in the center of what had become an impromptu war council, feeling completely out of his depth. Representatives from dozens of alien species surrounded him, all waiting for guidance from the humans who had accomplished the impossible. The weight of their expectations was crushing. The Kithani fleet numbers in the thousands, reported the insectoid being, its compound eyes reflecting the light from the approaching ships. Our combined forces are outnumbered 50-1. Branchen, the tree-like Verdani, rustled his silver bark nervously. The servant species fight with religious fervor. They believe they are avenging their gods. Logic and reason will not sway them. The crystalline Zeltharian's form dimmed with concern. Our intelligence suggests they carry planet-killer weapons. They would rather destroy this world than allow the Devourer's killers to escape. Sarah pulled her children closer, while Buddy growled at the approaching ships as if he could sense their malevolent intent. "There has to be somewhere we can go, somewhere safe," she said desperately. But Emma shook her head, her young face showing a wisdom that seemed impossible for her age. "Running won't work. If these Devourer things are as dangerous as they say, and if we really hurt them somehow, then we have to finish what we started." Jake nodded in agreement with his sister. "Besides, all these aliens came here to help us. We can't just abandon them." Mark looked at his children with a mixture of pride and terror. They were right. But he had no idea how a family of 4 could possibly lead an intergalactic war against creatures that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. The energy being in the spherical suit floated closer, its electronic voice crackling with urgency. "The humans must understand something crucial. The death of the Devourer has created what we call a cascade event. Every Devourer in the galaxy felt the death of their brother. They are weakened, vulnerable for the first time in eons. But that also means they know where we are." The Zeltarian added grimly. "The servant species are only the beginning. The Devourers themselves will come." Mark felt his stomach drop. How many of these things are there? The assembled aliens exchanged glances that somehow conveyed eons of terror. Branchen spoke first, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "Conservative estimates suggest 13 still exist in our galaxy alone, each one capable of consuming entire star systems. 13 monsters that feed on civilizations," Sarah whispered. "And they're all coming here because of what we did." But Emma stepped forward, her backpack still slung over her shoulders, and Mark noticed she was checking her remaining emergency flares. "Then we need to be ready for them. What did you all try before? What didn't work?" The question seemed to surprise the aliens, the insectoid being clicked thoughtfully. "Energy weapons phase through them. Kinetic weapons are absorbed. Nuclear fire is consumed like food. We attempted biological warfare, quantum disruption, even antimatter bombardment. Nothing could harm them." "Because you were all thinking like advanced civilizations," Jake said suddenly, causing every alien to turn toward the 10-year-old boy. "You used fancy technology against something that exists outside normal space." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "But fire is fire no matter what dimension you're in. And humans have been using fire since we lived in caves." The crystalline being's form brightened with understanding. Chemical reactions anchored in base reality. Primitive technology that cannot be phased away from or absorbed. Mark felt a spark of hope as he began to understand what his children were suggesting. "You're saying we fight gods with Stone Age weapons?" "Not just Stone Age," Emma corrected, pulling out her tablet and beginning to type rapidly. "Every simple chemical reaction we can think of. Dad, you work in chemical engineering, right? And Mom's a chemistry teacher." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what her daughter was proposing. "Emma, you want to turn the entire human species into weapons manufacturers?" "Not just humans," Jake added, looking around at the assembled aliens. "All of them. Every species here must have some kind of basic chemistry, right?" The energy being pulsed with what might have been excitement. "The young humans propose an alliance based on primitive technology rather than advanced weapons." Branchen's bark began to shimmer. "My people are masters of biological chemistry. We could produce compounds that would burn in any atmosphere." The insectoid being's antennae twitched rapidly. "Our hives specialize in acid production, biological acids that exist purely in base reality." Mark felt the pieces falling into place. "We're not trying to out-tech them. We're going completely the opposite direction. We hit them with every simple, dirty, primitive chemical reaction we can create." The first Kithani ships had entered the atmosphere, their organic hulls glowing with re-entry heat. The psychic screams of rage were growing stronger, and several of the smaller alien species were beginning to show signs of mental strain from the telepathic assault. "We need to move fast," the Zeltharian warned. The servant species will attempt to summon their remaining gods once they realize the scope of opposition they face. Emma looked up from her tablet, where she had been frantically typing notes. I have an idea, but it's going to sound crazy. Mark knelt down beside his daughter. Honey, everything about today has been crazy. What are you thinking? What if we don't try to fight all the ships at once? What if we let them land, let them get close, and then hit them with everything at the same time? The assembled aliens reacted with shock. The insectoid being clicked rapidly in what sounded like alarm. Allow them to establish a ground presence? That would be tactical suicide. But Sarah was beginning to see her daughter's logic, unless you want them bunched up together.
Make them think they have us surrounded, then spring the trap? Jake nodded enthusiastically.
Like when we play video games. Sometimes the best strategy is to let the enemy think they're winning right up until they lose. The energy being floated closer to the family. This strategy requires perfect timing and coordination between species that have never worked together before. Then we better start practicing, Mark said, standing up and looking around at the diverse collection of aliens who had somehow become their allies. Because ready or not, we're about to become the galaxy's first primitive technology resistance movement. As the Chthoni ships began landing in the distance, creating a perimeter around the crash site, the most unlikely alliance in galactic history began to form. Advanced civilizations prepared to fight alongside humans using chemistry sets and flare guns against enemies they had feared for millennia. The desert around them began to transform as each species contributed their knowledge and resources. The Verdani began growing plants that could produce volatile compounds. The insectoids started constructing chemical processing chambers. The crystalline beings focused their energy on creating reaction catalysts. And in the center of it all, the Johnson family worked with their dog Buddy, who seemed to understand that something important was happening and appointed himself guardian of the children who had started a galactic revolution. The real battle was about to begin. The Chthoni ground forces emerged from their ships like nightmares given form. Thousands of the shape-shifting beings flowed across the desert sand, their forms constantly changing as they moved. Some walked upright like twisted humanoids, others scuttled on multiple limbs, and a few simply flowed across the ground like living liquid. Behind them came larger creatures, things that had once been other species before being consumed and converted by the devourers. Mark Johnson crouched behind a makeshift barricade constructed from crystalline growths and metallic debris, watching the enemy advance through a pair of alien binoculars. The diversity of the approaching force was terrifying. He could see what had once been warriors from dozens of different species, all now twisted into servants of the ancient hunger. Remember the plan? Emma whispered into the communication device that the Zeltharians had provided. Her voice carried to every member of their unlikely alliance. Let them get close. Let them think they have us surrounded. Then we light everything up at once. Sarah was stationed with a group of Verdani near their mobile chemistry lab, a bizarre combination of alien technology and human chemical knowledge. In the past few hours, they had managed to produce several tons of compounds that would burn in any atmosphere and could not be phase-shifted away from. The plant-like aliens had proven remarkably adept at rapid chemical synthesis. Jake was with the insectoid hive builders, helping to coordinate the placement of acid dispensers throughout their defensive perimeter. The boy had shown an intuitive understanding of tactical positioning that impressed even the military-minded alien species. Buddy stayed close to him, the dog's enhanced senses somehow able to detect approaching enemies before the alien sensors could. The energy being's electronic voice crackled through their communications. Enemy forces have established a complete perimeter. We are officially surrounded by approximately 10,000 hostiles. Good, Emma responded, checking her remaining flares. That means they're all in range. The first probing attacks came at sunset. Small groups of Chthoni warriors flowed toward their positions, testing their defenses. The Allied forces responded with conventional energy weapons, deliberately making their resistance look weak and disorganized. Several aliens were genuinely injured in these skirmishes, but they maintained the illusion that they were overwhelmed and desperate. As darkness fell, the main assault began. The Chthoni forces attacked from all sides simultaneously, their shape-shifting forms making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Their telepathic screams filled the air, a psychic assault designed to break the will of their enemies. But the Johnson family had taught their alien allies something the Cathani had never encountered before. The human concept of a sucker punch now, Emma shouted into the communicator. The desert erupted into chemical chaos. Verdini plants released clouds of volatile compounds that ignited on contact with the Cathani's organic forms. Insectoid acid dispensers sprayed concentrated biological acids that ate through the enemy's shape-shifting defenses. The crystalline beings created focused light beams that triggered thermite reactions in strategically placed chemical compounds. And throughout it all, humans moved between the positions with backpacks full of flares. Road flares, camping fuel, and every other simple chemical reaction they could devise. Mark found himself in hand-to-hand combat with a Cathani warrior, fighting it off with nothing but a road flare and the desperate strength of a father protecting his family. The effect on the enemy was immediate and devastating. The Cathani had never faced an assault based entirely on base reality chemistry. Their phase-shifting abilities, which had made them invulnerable to energy weapons for millennia, were useless against simple fire and acid. Creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years were dying to methods that humans had used since the Stone Age. But Emma noticed something that made her blood run cold. As the Cathani forces began to retreat, the sand beneath the battlefield started to vibrate with a frequency that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. They're calling for help, she realized with horror. The remaining Devourers are coming. The Zeltharian's crystalline form blazed with alarm. Dimensional rifts are opening above us. The Ancient Ones themselves approach. The sky began to tear open like fabric, revealing glimpses of impossible spaces beyond normal reality. Through these rifts came things that defied description. The Devourers were not just creatures. They were living embodiments of hunger itself, existing partially outside the universe and feeding on the life force of entire worlds. The first Devourer to emerge was even larger than the one Emma had killed aboard the ship. Its form constantly shifted between dimensions, making it appear as a constantly changing shadow against the stars. Tentacles that existed in multiple realities simultaneously reached down toward the battlefield, searching for the beings that had accomplished the impossible. Chemical weapons won't work if we can't hit them, Sarah realized with growing panic. They're not fully in our dimension. But Jake had been watching the patterns of the dimensional rifts, his young mind processing information that even the advanced alien computers couldn't interpret. Dad, look at how they're moving. They have to partially enter our reality to attack us, right? Mark followed his son's pointing finger and saw what the boy had noticed. Each time a Devourer reached toward their dimension to attack, parts of its body became solid and vulnerable. They can't feed without manifesting in base reality. Emma was already moving, pulling every remaining flare from her backpack. Then we make them hungry. We make them want to feed so badly that they have to become solid. The plan that emerged was insane even by the standards of their already impossible day. The Allied forces would deliberately make themselves appear vulnerable and appetizing to the Devourers, drawing the creatures into base reality where chemical weapons could affect them. Branchen's bark darkened with concern. This strategy requires someone to act as bait, someone the Devourers will find irresistible, the energy being pulsed grimly. The humans. They are the ones who killed the first Ancient One. The Devourers will want to consume them personally. Sarah grabbed Mark's arm. We're not using our children as bait for interdimensional monsters. But Emma stepped forward with the same determined expression she had worn when facing the first Devourer. Mom, we're not bait. We're the trap. The largest Devourer, ancient beyond measure and hungry beyond comprehension, began to descend toward the battlefield. Its presence alone caused several of the smaller alien species to flee in terror. This creature had consumed entire star systems, had fed on the life force of billions of sentient beings. As it reached toward the Johnson family with appendages that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Emma did something that would be remembered throughout galactic history. She stood up, looked directly at the cosmic horror descending toward her, and lit every remaining flare she possessed. The Devourer, drawn by the prospect of consuming the beings who had killed its brother, manifested fully in base reality, just as the chemical firestorm engulfed it. For the second time in one day, an Ancient One's death scream echoed across dimensions. But this time, the scream carried something else. Fear. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers had learned to be afraid. The remaining Ancient Ones began to retreat back through their dimensional rifts. But the damage had been done. 2 of their number were dead, killed by primitive chemistry and human courage. The galaxy would never be the same. As the dimensional rifts closed and the surviving Chthoni forces fled in confusion and terror, the Johnson family stood in the center of a battlefield that would become legend. They had not only survived an encounter with cosmic horrors, they had driven them back. The real consequences of their actions were only beginning to unfold. The aftermath of the battle left the Nevada desert transformed into something resembling an alien graveyard, mixed with a chemistry lab explosion. Pools of exotic acid still bubbled in the sand, while crystalline formations grew from spots where the Zeltharians had focused their energy. The air itself seemed different, charged with residual energies from the dimensional rifts that had torn through local space-time. Mark Johnson sat on a piece of debris from one of the destroyed Chthoni ships, trying to process what his family had just accomplished. Around him, representatives from dozens of alien species worked to treat their wounded and salvage what they could from the battlefield. The victory felt surreal, like a dream that might evaporate if he thought about it too hard. Sarah was helping the Verdani tend to injuries using a combination of human first aid knowledge and alien medical technology. Her background as a chemistry teacher had proven invaluable in understanding how different species' biochemistries reacted to various treatments. Emma and Jake were working with the insectoid beings to document everything they had learned about fighting the Devourers, creating what might become the galaxy's first manual for interdimensional monster hunting. Buddy had appointed himself guardian of the crash site, patrolling the perimeter and somehow managing to sense residual dimensional disturbances that even the aliens' sensors missed. The dog's behavior had become increasingly protective since the battle, as if he understood that his family had become the most important humans in galactic history. The crystalline Zeltharian approached Mark, its form still dimmed from the energy expenditure of the battle. The news of your victory is spreading faster than light-speed communication. Every civilized species in the galaxy is receiving reports of the Devourers' defeat. 2 down, 11 to go, Mark replied grimly. That doesn't sound like victory to me. Branchin rustled his silver bark in what might have been alien laughter. You misunderstand the significance of what has occurred. For 10,000 years, every species in the galaxy believed the Devourers were invincible. The psychological impact of their defeat cannot be overstated. The energy being floated closer, its electronic voice crackling with excitement. Preliminary reports indicate that servant species throughout the galaxy are abandoning their posts. The religious structure that held the Devourer cult together is collapsing. Emma looked up from her documentation work, her face smudged with soot and alien chemicals. That's good, right? Fewer servants means the Devourers are weaker, the insectoid being clicked thoughtfully. Correct. But it also means the remaining ancient ones are becoming desperate. A cornered predator is often more dangerous than a confident one. As if summoned by their discussion, new ships began appearing in the sky. But these vessels were different from anything they had seen before. They moved with a strange, stuttering motion, as if they were having difficulty remaining in normal space-time. Their hulls appeared to be made from crystallized darkness itself. Devourer ships, the Zeltharian announced with obvious dread. The ancient ones have come personally. Jake counted the approaching vessels through his borrowed alien binoculars. I see 7 ships. Does that mean 7 Devourers? The remaining 11 ancient ones, Branchin confirmed. They are no longer willing to work through servants. This is a direct assault. Sarah pulled her children closer, while Mark felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders again. We barely survived fighting 2 of them with an entire alien alliance helping us. How are we supposed to face 11? But Emma was studying the approaching ships with a calculating expression that reminded Mark uncomfortably of himself when he was solving complex engineering problems. Dad, look at how they're moving. They're having trouble staying in our dimension, right? Mark followed his daughter's gaze and realized she was correct. The Devourer ships were flickering in and out of visible reality, their interdimensional nature making it difficult for them to operate in normal space for extended periods. They're like submarines, Jake added suddenly. They have to surface to attack, but they can't stay surfaced for long, the energy being pulsed with understanding. The young humans have identified a critical weakness. The Devourer's power comes from their interdimensional nature, but it also limits their ability to operate in base reality. Emma nodded enthusiastically. So we don't try to fight them in space where they're strongest. We make them come down here where we can use chemistry against them. How do we do that? Sarah asked. We can't exactly send them an invitation to land. But the answer came from an unexpected source. Buddy began barking frantically, his enhanced senses detecting something the others had missed. Following the dog's agitated pointing, they spotted escape pods launching from the Devourer ships. But these weren't random evacuations. They were deliberate deployments. The Zeltharians' form blazed with alarm. Those are not escape pods. They are feeding chambers. The Devourers are sending parts of themselves to the surface while maintaining their primary forms in hyperspace. Mark understood immediately. They're trying to eat us while staying safe. Send down just enough of themselves to feed, but not enough to be vulnerable. Then we make sure they send down more than they intended, Emma said, pulling out her tablet and beginning to type rapidly. What if we gave them a target too tempting to resist? The plan that emerged was even more insane than their previous strategies. The Johnson family would deliberately broadcast their location and activities throughout the galaxy, making themselves irresistible bait for the Devourers. But instead of trying to hide or defend themselves, they would use their apparent vulnerability to draw the Ancient Ones into making a critical mistake. We're going to teach the entire galaxy how to fight these things, Sarah realized as she understood her daughter's plan. Turn Earth into a training ground for interdimensional monster hunting. Branchen's bark shimmered with what might have been approval. A defensive strategy based on education rather than force. Your species thinks in ways that continue to surprise us. The energy being began coordinating with the other alien species to implement the plan. We will need to establish communication networks throughout the galaxy. Every species must learn these chemical warfare techniques. The insectoid being clicked rapidly with excitement. My hive mind can process and distribute tactical information faster than any conventional communication system. We can coordinate simultaneous attacks across multiple star systems. As the Devourer feeding chambers descended toward Earth's surface, the Johnson family found themselves at the center of the largest educational initiative in galactic history. They were about to turn humanity's primitive chemical knowledge into a weapon that could liberate the entire galaxy from interdimensional parasites. The first feeding chamber landed several miles away, disgorging a portion of a Devourer that was still terrifyingly massive, despite being only a fragment of the complete creature. The thing that emerged was part tentacle, part mouth, and part something that hurt to look at directly. Emma checked her remaining supplies. 3 road flares, a camping fuel canister, and several packets of chemical hand warmers that her mother had brought for the camping trip they had been planning before their lives turned upside down. No, she said to her family as they prepared for another impossible battle. I think this is going to be more educational than any camping trip we could have planned. Mark couldn't help but laugh despite their desperate situation. His daughter was right. They were about to give the galaxy its first lesson in human ingenuity, and the tuition was going to be paid in interdimensional monster blood. The real war for galactic freedom was about to begin, and it would be fought with chemistry sets and courage against enemies that had terrorized space for millennia. The galactic communication network that the allied species established within hours of the Johnson family's plan was unlike anything in recorded history. The insectoid hive mind served as the central processing hub, while the Zeltharian crystalline matrices amplified signals across impossible distances. The Verdani grew biological communication relays that could interface with any form of technology, and the energy beings provided the power to maintain real-time contact with thousands of worlds simultaneously. Emma Johnson stood at the center of this cosmic switchboard, speaking into a communication device that translated her words into hundreds of alien languages instantaneously. Her audience included the military leaders of advanced civilizations, the scientific councils of species that had existed for millions of years, and terrified populations who had lived under the shadow of the Devourers for countless generations. The most important thing to remember, Emma said, her 12-year-old voice carrying across the galaxy, is that fire is fire no matter what dimension you're in. It doesn't matter how advanced your technology is. What matters is that the chemical reactions happen in base reality, where the Devourers can't phase away from them. On countless worlds, beings that had never heard of humanity before today began gathering simple chemical compounds, species that had evolved beyond the need for primitive fire, were rediscovering the basic principles of combustion. Ancient civilizations were learning chemistry lessons. From a human child who still had homework assignments waiting for her back on Earth, Jake worked alongside alien engineers to design simple chemical weapons that could be manufactured by any species with basic industrial capability. His video game experience, combined with his intuitive understanding of tactical coordination, proved invaluable in creating strategies that could be implemented simultaneously across multiple star systems. "It's like a massive multiplayer game," he explained to a council of military strategists from the Rigelian Defense Force. "Except instead of trying to get a high score, we're trying to save the galaxy with chemistry." Sets Mark and Sarah found themselves serving as technical consultants to alien scientists who possessed technology that seemed like magic but had forgotten the fundamental principles of simple chemical reactions. Sarah's chemistry teaching background became the foundation for a crash course in basic chemical warfare that was being taught on 1,000 worlds simultaneously. The key is understanding that complexity isn't always better. Sarah explained to a group of crystalline beings whose natural forms could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective, especially against enemies who have evolved to counter sophisticated attacks. Meanwhile, Buddy had become something of a celebrity among the alien forces. His ability to sense dimensional disturbances and predict devourer manifestations had proven so accurate that several species were requesting permission to study canine sensory capabilities. The dog seemed to understand his importance, maintaining a constant patrol around the communication equipment and alerting everyone whenever the fabric of space-time began to fluctuate. The first coordinated galactic assault was scheduled to begin when the Devourer's feeding chambers made contact with planetary surfaces across multiple star systems. Intelligence reports indicated that all 11 remaining Ancient Ones were deploying simultaneously, spreading their feeding operations across hundreds of worlds in an attempt to consume enough life force to replace their fallen brothers. "Remember," Emma broadcast to the waiting galaxy, "they have to become solid to feed. That's when they're vulnerable. Wait for them to fully manifest, then hit them with everything you've got." The battle began at exactly the same moment across 50 different star systems. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves fighting side by side, united by shared knowledge of primitive chemistry and human tactical insights. The Draconian Empire used thermite charges manufactured according to human specifications. The Crystalline Collective focused solar energy to trigger chemical reactions on a planetary scale. Even the normally pacifistic Healing Caste began producing biological acids based on insectoid designs modified by human innovation. From Earth's surface, the Johnson family watched through alien view screens as the galaxy erupted in coordinated chemical warfare. Reports flooded in from battle sites across known space, each confirming that the impossible was happening. The Devourers, creatures that had been invincible for 10,000 years, were being hurt by methods that some species had abandoned before developing space travel. But the Ancient Ones were learning too. The later attacks showed signs of adaptation, with the Devourers attempting to maintain greater distance from planetary surfaces while still deploying their feeding appendages. Some began using converted servant species as shields, forcing the defenders to burn through layers of enslaved beings to reach the true enemy. "They're getting smarter," Jake observed, watching tactical displays that showed the evolving nature of the interdimensional assault. "We need to change our strategy too." Emma nodded, studying reports from the front lines of a war that spanned the galaxy. "What if we stop trying to fight them where they choose to manifest? What if we force them to come to us on our terms?" The solution that emerged was as audacious as everything else the family had accomplished. Instead of waiting for the Devourers to choose their attack sites, they would create artificial feeding situations that would be irresistible to the Ancient Ones, but would actually be elaborate traps. "We're going to use ourselves as bait again," Sarah realized as she understood the plan. "But this time we're going to do it on a galactic scale." The strategy required every allied species to contribute something precious: their own life force. Not permanently, but temporarily, in concentrations that would appear as irresistible feeding opportunities to the Devourers. The plan was to create false populations of concentrated life energy that would draw the Ancient Ones into carefully prepared chemical ambushes. The Verdani contributed biological life force, amplifiers that could make small populations appear vast too. Interdimensional senses. The crystalline beings created energy-focusing arrays that could concentrate the appearance of sentient thought across entire solar systems. The insectoids provided pheromone-based lures that would trigger feeding responses in the devourers, and at the center of each trap would be a human family with a dog, armed with chemical reactions that predated their species' development of agriculture. "There are 11 devourers left," Mark said, as they prepared for the final phase of their impossible war. "We need 11 traps, and we need them all to work perfectly." But Emma was already coordinating with alien families across the galaxy, teaching them the fundamentals of human courage and chemical warfare. Crystalline children were learning to light flares. Insectoid larvae were being taught to mix acids. Verdani saplings were growing explosive compounds in their branches. "We don't need 11 traps," Emma announced to the galaxy-wide communication network. "We need 11 trillion. Every family, every individual, every being who wants to be free from these monsters. We're going to make the entire galaxy into one big chemistry experiment." The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the core worlds to the outer rim, from ancient civilizations to recently spacefaring species, billions of beings began preparing chemical weapons using instructions provided by a human family from Ohio. The Devourers, sensing the unprecedented concentration of life force gathering across the galaxy, began emerging from their interdimensional refugees in greater numbers than ever before. They came expecting the greatest feeding frenzy in their eternal existence. Instead, they found themselves facing the largest coordinated chemical attack in galactic history, orchestrated by creatures they had never bothered to notice before their interference began. The final battle for galactic freedom was about to begin, and it would be fought with fire, acid, and explosives against gods who had forgotten that sometimes the oldest weapons are the most effective. The final battle began not with a single moment of violence, but with the largest coordinated action in galactic history. Across 11 different star systems, the remaining Devourers emerged from their interdimensional refugees simultaneously, drawn by what appeared to be the most concentrated gathering of life force they had ever encountered. Each ancient one materialized expecting to feast upon entire civilizations that had gathered in apparent terror and helplessness. Instead, they found themselves facing the accumulated chemical knowledge of 10,000 species, coordinated by a human family that had turned primitive fire into a weapon of cosmic liberation. Emma Johnson's voice echoed across the galaxy through the vast communication network, reaching every world, every ship, every being that had chosen to stand against the ancient hunger. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species they've consumed, every world they've destroyed, every future they've stolen. This ends today." The response was immediate and overwhelming. On the crystalline worlds of the Zeltharian Collective, beings of living diamond ignited chemical fires that burned with the intensity of stars. In the biocities of the Verdani Empire, massive trees released clouds of explosive pollen that detonated on contact with interdimensional matter. The insectoid hives launched coordinated acid attacks that created rivers of corrosive death across entire continents. But the most remarkable sight was on thousands of smaller worlds, where individual families, inspired by the courage of 4 humans and their dog, faced down cosmic horrors with nothing but simple chemistry and absolute determination. Crystalline children threw homemade thermite charges at tentacles that could devour solar systems. Insectoid larvae sprayed biological acids at creatures that existed partially outside reality. Verdani saplings grew explosive fruits and hurled them at gods that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. Mark Johnson stood on a hill overlooking the Nevada desert, watching through alien view screens as his family's impossible journey reached its climax. The largest of the remaining Devourers had manifested directly above Earth, its form so vast that it blocked out the sun and moon simultaneously. Tentacles thick as skyscrapers descended toward the planet's surface, each one capable of draining the life force from entire continents. "That's the big one," Jake observed with the calm matter-of-factness that had characterized his family's entire adventure. "The one that's been controlling all the others." Sarah nodded grimly, checking her supply of chemical weapons. In the past few days, she had gone from chemistry teacher to galactic weapons instructor, and she was prepared to demonstrate the final lesson personally. If we take down their leader, the others should become disorganized. But Emma was studying the massive creature with the same analytical intensity she had shown throughout their ordeal. It's not just bigger, she realized. It's different. Look at how it's manifesting. Unlike the other devourers, which had to partially phase into base reality to feed, this ancient one was manifesting completely in their dimension. Its entire form was solid, vulnerable, but also impossibly powerful. The creature's psychic presence alone was causing earthquakes across the planet, and its hunger was so intense that it was beginning to drain life force from everything within a 1,000-mile radius. It's desperate, Mark realized. They've lost so many of their own that this one is risking everything for a massive feeding. The assembled alien alliance began their coordinated assault, but their chemical weapons, which had proven so effective against the other devourers, seemed to have little effect on this ancient entity. The creature's hide absorbed their acids, its interdimensional nature allowing it to shed burning chemicals like water, rolling off a duck's back. "We need something bigger," the crystalline Zeltharian announced, its form blazing with desperate energy. "This ancient one is too powerful for conventional chemical warfare." But Buddy was behaving strangely, running in circles around the family while barking frantically at something only he could sense. The dog's agitation was so intense that even the aliens began to take notice. "What's he trying to tell us?" Emma asked, kneeling down to comfort the golden retriever. Jake followed Buddy's frantic pointing with his binoculars and spotted something that made his blood run cold. Guys? The big devourer isn't alone." Emerging from dimensional rifts around the world were the other 10 ancient ones, all manifesting simultaneously in response to their leader's desperate gamble. The creatures had abandoned their careful interdimensional positioning and were committing everything to one final feeding frenzy. "They're all here," Sarah whispered in horror. "Every single remaining devourer is on Earth right now." The alien alliance forces began to panic as they realized the scope of what they were facing. 11 cosmic horrors, each capable of consuming entire star systems, all manifesting simultaneously on a single world. The psychic pressure alone was causing weaker alien species to collapse, and the combined hunger of the ancient ones was beginning to drain the life force from everything on the planet. But Emma Johnson, 12 years old and armed with 3 road flares and a half-empty bottle of camping fuel, looked at the 11 creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years and smiled. "Perfect," she said. "They're all together, they're all solid, and they're all in the same place." Mark felt a chill of understanding. "Emma, what are you thinking?" "Dad, you work in chemical engineering." "Mom teaches chemistry. What's the most basic principle of combustion?" Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what her daughter was suggesting. "The fire triangle. Heat, fuel, and oxygen. Remove any one element and the reaction stops. But add more of any element," Emma continued, "and the reaction becomes exponentially more powerful." Jake nodded enthusiastically, like when you pour gasoline on a campfire and the whole forest almost burns down. The plan that emerged was simple, elegant, and completely insane. Instead of trying to fight 11 devourers with small chemical attacks, they would create a single chemical reaction large enough to affect all of them simultaneously. The alien alliance would contribute every chemical compound they had manufactured, creating a combustion reaction that would span the entire planet. "We're going to turn Earth into one giant chemistry experiment," Mark realized. "The biggest chemical reaction in planetary history." The preparation was frantic but coordinated. The Verdani began growing explosive plants across every continent. The insectoids established acid distribution networks that spanned the globe. The crystalline beings created energy-focusing arrays that could trigger simultaneous ignition on a planetary scale. And the Johnson family, with Buddy at their side, stood at the center of it all, ready to light the fuse on the largest firework in galactic history. As the 11 devourers descended toward Earth's surface, their combined hunger creating storms of psychic energy that tore through the planet's atmosphere. Emma Johnson raised her final road flare. "This is for every species you've consumed," she said, her young voice carrying across the galaxy through the communication network. "This is for every world you've destroyed. And this is for thinking you could feed on my family." She lit the flare and threw it into the center of the carefully prepared chemical array. The explosion was visible from neighboring star systems. Earth's entire atmosphere ignited in a chemical firestorm that burned with the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 species and the concentrated courage of a human family from Ohio. The 11 ancient ones, trapped in base reality by their own desperate hunger, found themselves consumed by the very fire that humanity had first discovered in caves millions of years ago. When the flames finally died down, The galaxy was silent. The devourers were gone, not just killed but completely obliterated. Their interdimensional essence scattered across impossible spaces where they could never reform. The Johnson family stood in the aftermath, singed but alive, surrounded by alien allies who regarded them with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had not only saved their own world, but had liberated the entire galaxy from a terror that had dominated it for millennia. Emma looked around at the transformed landscape, then down at Buddy, who was wagging his tail as if they had just completed a successful camping trip. "So," she said to her family, "what do we do for our next vacation?" Mark Johnson, chemical engineer from Ohio, savior of the galaxy and father of the most remarkable children in the universe, could only laugh. "I think we've earned a nice quiet trip to Disneyland." The galaxy, for the first time in 10,000 years, was free, and it had been liberated by the power of human ingenuity, family courage, and really good chemistry.